Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, with chief focus on the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel's northern front, as well as the Gaza Strip, it's always important to remember how the war began. 403 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip have launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping roughly 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined that war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks into Israel. Since then, Hezbollah has launched over 12,000 munitions towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional Iranian proxies have launched directly at Israel from Iraq, from Syria, from Yemen, including Iran proper, which yet again is seemingly poised on doing so. Nevertheless, it seems to be deterred at this point in time, but we need, of course, to wait and see how this whole situation evolves. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor at large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, on the one hand, we are seemingly identifying Iran as being deterred, especially following a Trump or a decisive Trump victory, both the White House, the Senate, as well as the Congress being under Republican control in the next administration. But at the same time, the Iranians are still trickling down all kind of reports of preparations, also announcing a no-TAM, a no-fly zone, basically above Iranian airspace between the 18th and 20th of this month. Is this an indication of prospects for miscalculation by the Ayatollah regime?
First of all, regarding Congress, it is still to be determined, even though the Republicans have a huge advantage in the seats still open with the votes being counted. But while everyone is waiting for that, President-elect Trump has already nominated several House members to positions in his administration, which will then compel the various districts to hold new elections. Now, these are mostly solid Republican districts, and it is expected not to damage his calculations regarding the control of all branches, but nevertheless, it opens some new chapter in the electoral contest. Now, regarding Iran, obviously, it waits to see what is happening. It must have been overjoyed at the prospect of Mike Pompeo, the mastermind of the maximum pressure campaign, not being back at his old job of Secretary of State. There are still senior jobs open, so he may still be there. But right now, there is no sense in trying to determine the course of this administration before everything is known about all of the key positions.
With that being said, Mike Waltz, a hawk when we're talking about Iran, taking the position of National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio receiving the Secretary of State, also a hawk when we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran, clear-eyed, if I may say, about the belligerence of this Ayatollah regime when we're talking about regional peace and stability and the implications beyond that.
Yes, but China seems to be a priority, not Iran. Perhaps some feelers between President-elect Trump and President Putin in order to have a sort of an alliance so that China will be more isolated. Iran right now is not top of the list. But coming back to our war, 5 IDF soldiers, including one officer, have been killed over the last 24 hours. In the northern part of the Gaza Strip, where the Israeli forces have killed 1,000 terrorists, and captured another 1,000. But nevertheless, they have not decimated the Hamas strongholds altogether. So it seems that
Specifically for the Jabalia
yes,
camp.
but right now it's Jabalia. If they go back into some other area, there will be more firefights. In the north, right now the front seems to be quite frozen. On the ground, there are rockets and drones and missiles still being launched into Israel, most of them being intercepted by the Israeli air and missile defense array, both by fighters and from the ground. But nevertheless, some have managed to penetrate, causing a lot of damage.
Indeed. Let's turn now to central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the head of intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's great to see you, General. I'd like immediately to ask you, IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, was deep inside Jabalia, visiting together with IDF Southern Command commander, as well as the field commanders of the 162nd Division, during the course of which, as Mr. Oren mentioned, he highlighted the staggering achievement of eliminating roughly 1,000 Hamas terror operatives over the course of 3 weeks alone and capturing another 1,000 roughly, and highlighting that the State of Israel and the IDF in particular will continue to follow Hezbollah wherever those operatives may hide and will continue to degrade their ability as they move forward. Nevertheless, at the same time, we see a high-intensity conflagration with multiple projectiles being launched towards Israel from the northern front of Israel. Is Israel deeply entrenched on both fronts, or are we going to see a certain breakthrough on the northern front, as we may be hearing from Jerusalem's top diplomat as well as the newly appointed defense minister?
I think that if you look at the broader picture, we are fighting in three arenas simultaneously. First of all, what happens in Gaza is the war is not over. For two main reasons. The first one is a place that we live. They come back, they create their own infrastructure, and they begin developing their capacity or building their capacity. And we have to go back and forth, and to try to eliminate them. And when we get out, it will be back soon. It will take some time, but nevertheless, and this is an ongoing process until something is going to be stabilized within Gaza, meaning that somebody else will get to rule Gaza and to begin engaging all these terrorist groups and to try to push Hamas governance outside this strip, because they're still controlling, on the what they call on the civilian side, they're controlling Gaza Strip. And as long as they are there, it will go on, this phenomenon is going to be going on every area of Gaza that you are not being there permanently. That's it. Second, about Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah is not defeated, even though it has been weakened very well, and we caused them a lot of damage, and nevertheless, they keep on firing almost 200 projectiles every day, including UAVs, of course, and the kamikaze UAVs that succeed in penetrating some of them and causing damage, and others that are being intercepted on the way, and projectiles that fall inside Israel, some of them, and cause damage to residents. And as long as we are fighting in Lebanon, and as long as Hezbollah is not defeated, and it's very complicated to defeat him, because it means that you have to go very deep inside Lebanon in order to rule out his capabilities, and we are not in position to do that right now. The third front is what happens in Judea and Samaria, and you connect it to what happens in Jordan. In Jordan, the Iranians are trying to destabilize the regime of King Abdullah and to bring weapon systems to the Muslim Brotherhood inside Jordan to destabilize the regime on one hand, and the second hand, to use the area of what we call the Jordan Bekaa Valley Jordan Valley, to smuggle weapon systems inside to Israel, to Judea and Samaria, and they keep on fighting there on a daily basis. It is getting less attention on the communication, and it gets publicity, but nevertheless, we're fighting there on a daily basis. And this is the third front.
Indeed, of course, the Islamist Hamas announced that Al-Muhandis, one of its top commanders in the Samaria areas, was eliminated over the course of the past 24 hours, alongside also the IDF in close cooperation, of course, with the ISA or Shin Bet and border police apprehending multiple suspects of terror, as well as smuggling networks that have managed to, in the past at least, to penetrate Israeli territory with various munitions in order to grant Hamas more means in order to cause an uprising. Thankfully, these several rings were apprehended also over the course of the past 48 hours alone. But let's turn elsewhere in central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. It's great to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you, since yesterday reportedly was the heaviest barrages of rockets emanating out of Lebanon towards the northern communities of Israel, with multiple of those projectiles also striking civilian or residential buildings, causing a number of casualties. What can you tell us about that, and what should the Israeli public in particularly remember when hearing a siren?
Well, first of all, we all have to remember, Jonathan, that we are in war. The war is still there. I fully agree with what was said by Dr. Sofrin about the whole arena. The challenges are still there in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran for sure, and in the West Bank, in Iraq, in Syria, and Yemen. So we are still in this war, and this is basically the first thing that we all have to remember. The other thing is that we didn't achieve yet all our goals, starting with the hostages that are still in the Gaza Strip. Of course, our civilians from the north and for the south part of Israel, we want them to be back securely to their house and homes. And unfortunately, we are not there yet. So the bottom line, we are still in war. Of course, when it comes to the Lebanese arena and what we are seeing in the last few days, maybe a week or two, is that the Lebanese are trying to regain some of their capabilities. We have to remember that before the war, we were talking about between 100 to 150,000 rockets and missiles that were in the Hezbollah's arsenal. So even if 80% of it or 70% of it now was destroyed, still they do have some numbers that they could shoot toward Israel. Of course, the IDF is doing whatever it can in order to deny as much as we can those capabilities in the attack, on the alert, in the active defense, in the passive defense. But again and again, we continuously discuss it, that this defense is not a hermetic one. I do think that we are close to this point, and we all feel it, that maybe things could be changed. I think that militarily, we did most of the job, both in the south and in the north. And I believe that the IDF in general, again, brought us to a point that now we could consider to go to the next step, which would be the political one, policies and others. And of course, with the new administration, that might be another option to do to look at things differently in this area. So I think that in general we are there, and I really hope that like Clausewitz was stating that we are now getting close to the next step, and we would have an agreement in the north and the south, and we would be able to see our hostages back. But it might take time, and we would have to still be ready to all those 7 different arenas that I just mentioned.
Mr. Owen, 2 points about Lebanon. The first one, the majority of the launching points of the barrages yesterday came from villages where the IDF was already. It controlled those villages. It degraded much of Hezbollah's terror infrastructure in those villages. Nevertheless, it seems like not everything was eradicated, and therefore Hezbollah obviously utilized whatever may have been there. With that being said, the operation is achieving its goals of at least establishing a certain DMZ or demilitarized zone. But nonetheless, in order to really defeat Hezbollah, as was the case in 2006, there is no operation of encirclement around Hezbollah terror operatives, which then forced the then leader of Hezbollah, Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, to adopt UN Security Council Resolution 1701. No matter, of course, that he didn't follow through on any of his promises or pledges, but nonetheless, it seems like there is currently a diplomatic process in an attempt to reach a certain understanding with the state of Lebanon, which would then further degrade Hezbollah, at least would be pledging to do so, and Israel would maintain some of the rights to enforce the various arrangements that are implemented, but it won't be able to do so unless Hezbollah complies. Why should it?
So there are several points in your remarks and questions. Regarding the so-called line of contact adjacent to the border or to the blue line, yes, most of the terrain has been thoroughly worked on, screened, a lot of weapons and munitions being dug out of tunnels and rest areas. This was supposed to be a springboard for the raiding parties of the Radwan force. If they wanted to try and raid the Galilee settlements and outposts inside Israel. So this danger has been dealt with. However, as you remarked, it's very easy to infiltrate back and put some small canisters with rockets, with a timer, sneak back out, and then let it rain on Israel. In addition to that, all of that is south of the Litani. There are many available, possible points north of the Litani. Not all of them have been in use, and an arrangement will be necessary in order to stop Hezbollah from using them. However, the government of Israel, while of course more in control of the country than the Lebanese government, there is no comparison, nevertheless is not alone in having an impact on policy. The residents of the north are in practice having a veto over the decision, which is individual, but also the leaders of the communities are putting pressure on the government not to stop right now, because this is an opportunity which may never return to the Israeli defense forces. And the community leaders are publicly pushing the government to refrain from having an arrangement. So we know that Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, is in the States for talks with both the outgoing Biden administration and some key people in the Trump administration, perhaps President-elect Trump himself.
He's expected to meet with Trump himself.
Yes, but you know, Dermer was formerly a Republican politician in Florida. Florida has now captured the administration. The president the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor all reside in Florida. So obviously, Minister Dermer has excellent connections there. But up to now, the formula which emissary Amos Hochstein presented did not get traction.
Indeed. Well, with regard to Dermer having good connections in Florida or the United States at large, that's an understatement. But he had also a meeting in Moscow prior to his visit in the United States. It's very interesting, of course, to speculate about what it may entail. But at a time when we do hear also the foreign minister speaking about a certain arrangement with the Russians, about ensuring a certain thwarting of munitions, being diverted through Syrian territory to the Lebanese, something that, of course, the Russians are able to control if they really want to. That is something that is currently being discussed on and actually stated in multiple forums. And therefore, I'd like to ask you, General, when we're talking about General Sofrin, of course, when we're talking about the complexity of engaging with the Russians, can Israel really trust them at a time when they have a strategic alliance with our key adversary, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran?
There are two answers to what you just asked. The first one is the fact that there is a siren outside, but nevertheless, I'll keep on talking. The first one is Russia is really a strategic ally with Iran and North Korea and China, and all four of them are forming what we call the new axis of evil, to some extent as a balance to what we call the Western community of Europe and the United States. Nevertheless, they have interest inside Syria because they have an airport and a naval port inside Syria under their control on the northern part of Syria, in the area of Latakia. And when you look at that, they have all the interest right now, first of all, to assist President Assad to stay in power. And that means that they will try to make all the best of them to try to block any attempt to smuggle weapon systems coming out from Iran via Syria into Lebanon, and to play a role within all the arrangements in the Middle East, and not to leave only with the United States and French to some extent, or alone to be part of what we call this area, or controlling the area and then arranging all these arrangements. And they want to be a part of that because they consider themselves to be a superpower. Now, can you trust them or not? Let's say that during the time before this war broke out, and Israel carried out a lot of activities inside Syria to deny all kinds of attempts and to destroy all kinds of infrastructure of the Iranians and so on, we coordinated that with the Russian forces, and they closed one eye and allowed us or enabled us to operate there without any disturbance. And I believe that as long as speaking about interests of both sides, it can go together, and we can trust them that they will make the best to control that, because I think that they don't want the Iranians to get too much power inside Syria, which will undermine the control of or the regime of President Assad.
In layman's terms, we can trust them to follow their own interests, and so long as they align with ours, they will follow through. General Gavish, we have roughly 2.5 minutes left, and therefore I'd like to hear your take, since the situation, of course, also on Israel's most southern front, namely that of Yemen, is not very quiet. I know you can't speak about too much due to your position. Nevertheless, when it comes down to it, the culprit behind everything, irrespective of the fact that Ansar Allah, namely the Houthi tribe in Yemen, is actively pressing the buttons and launching those projectiles, the one responsible is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Are we expected to make the case to go after Iran's capabilities?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, but I just want to mention that Dr. Sofrin just said that he heard the tyrants, and I just heard the interceptions. So I think that we are good on this one. Going back to your question, indeed, the Houthis are still there. And I believe that the first strategic question is really the deterrence of the coalition, because unfortunately, although there is a quite strong coalition in this area, the Houthis are still in a position that they are effectively shooting missiles toward Israel. Of course, as you said, this is the long arm of the Iranians, which are still trying to shoot toward Israel. They did it, by the way, also with the UAVs coming from Iran, from Iraq, sorry, in the last few days. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we are still in this war, and if it is not directly from Iran, it is coming through its proxies. I believe that we should all probably, after a year, I'm talking about the full coalition, we should probably look as a lesson learned process and ask ourselves how could we be better with this challenge of the Houthis from a deterrence point of view and maybe from other point of view, because the dilemma is not only for Israel, and we know that there were 14 missiles that were shot at Israel in the last year, coming from Yemen. All of them intercepted, but we always said that it is not hermetic. And as I just said, the challenge is not only Israel. The challenge is the naval routes. Egypt, that the Suez Canal is basically blocked because no one goes through there because of what the Houthis influencing on the area, and other influence, other things that they are influencing. So this is really a main challenge that we all as a coalition would have to look at.
Indeed. Of course, to remember, it's a U.S.-led coalition under U.S. Central Command, which just in the past 24 hours has launched multiple aerial strikes, both in Syria against Iranian proxies there, as well as in Yemen against the Houthis there. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to immediately thank General Gavish, General Sofrin, and Mr. Oren here with me in the studio, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.